Good afternoon and welcome candidates, co-leads, Rsgi elders, and other colleagues to the 2021 City of Seattle Citywide Race and Social Justice Initiative, Change Teams, Co-Leads, Mayoral Candidate Forum. It's a really long name, but that's why we're here. Today we re-invoke the spirit of community organizing that led to the creation of the initiative and engage in work that sees democracy in action from the point of view of a city workforce deeply committed to intersectional racial justice for us and for the communities we serve, particularly BIPOC communities. In the last 3 years, the City of Seattle Citywide Change Team co-leads made a collective decision to mobilize their efforts and analysis to shift their work to respond to citywide Rsgi issues as they arose. In so doing, this group met with Mayor Jenny Durkin in November 2019 and subsequently with Council President González and other members of the City Council in August of last year. We've organized to ensure an Rsgi lens is leveled at the budget process this year and continue to work in our departments to strengthen our change teams to continue shifting city government towards being a more inclusive, multicultural, and anti-racist organization. Both meetings focused on ways the mayor and the council could increasingly cooperate with this body to continue to lead with race and to center an Rsgi analysis in all decision-making processes. The other thing to happen last year was a global pandemic, by the way, and people taking to the streets to protest not only because of the racist discrepancies laid bare by COVID, but because of the ongoing murder of Black people at the hands of law enforcement nationwide. Also, we were all up late throughout the night looking at those protests in Capitol Hill online. This body wrote correspondence to city leadership supporting the demands made by those on the cutting edge of anti-racist activism to interrogate the city's investment in a harmful and racist method of addressing public safety. This letter was signed by over 30 supporting groups, affiliates, and allies that backed our call to support protesters' demands to defund, invest, and release. We recognize that while the call to defund the police may come from the streets, it's employees like us and politicians like you that have to do the work that can make that demand a reality. You've talked about the homeless, unhoused situation, affordable housing, transportation, and more at other events. We won't be asking you about those things. This event is for you to explain how you will lead us, the City of Seattle staff, and help the co-leads in their efforts to undo institutional racism. The co-leads are interested in building the relationships necessary to do the transformative policy work that needs to be undertaken to truly undo institutional racism. In one direction, the bridge is built with community and forged by the work of reallocating resources and power adequately to those most harmed by intersectional racism, as is the essence of equity work. And in the other direction, we build a bridge to you, those who would hold the reins of institutional power in a system designed from get-go to benefit white people, usually at the expense and harm of Black and brown people and communities. We want to work together from day one. In fact, if we count now, we're starting from T-minus 81 days to a new administration. And everything we're doing is to ensure that the transition does not stall the work, but strengthens it, and you both see the benefits of a continued partnership with the city's Rsgi apparatus. So I'd like to welcome both candidates, the co-leads, and all the supporting staff here to this event, we can now proceed with the program. So I'm going to do the grounding. So I'm going to just be really honest. I sweat a lot. I kind of want someone to help me with that. I know. I didn't think under the hot light I would be so, but I guess I am. So if somebody could just help me out, that would be nice. Okay, so I'll get started with the program.
We're supposed to be sweating, not you.
I know. I don't know what's up. I think my friends are going to help me out. Okay, so while I'm sweating, though, maybe it's appropriate because I'm going to do the land acknowledgement. I'm going to read this out to you all. We do this Rsgi work on the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, the original stewards of the land past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. Usually when I do a land acknowledgement for an Rsgi training or some Rsgi event, what I really ask folks to do is to really close their eyes and to understand that we couldn't be here without the massive displacement of entire brown communities of Native Indigenous people. That's blood, that's families broken asunder, that's communities torn apart. For us to have this institution, for us to have this building here on this ground, on this land. And so when we're doing a land acknowledgement, that's what we're acknowledging. We're acknowledging that we're part of this, and we have to undo it. So this acknowledgement acts only as a first step in honoring the land that we are on and their people. It only becomes meaningful when combined with accountable relationships and informed actions. We invite you to visit Real Rent Duwamish at realrentduwamish.org and consider a contribution. Now I'm going to introduce the director of the Seattle Office for Civil Rights, Mariko Lockhart, who, by the way, I just want to point out that we both started our journey in the Office for Civil Rights together. I think we started a day apart, and it's been such a journey from there to here, where we're working really hard to make sure that Rsgi issues and events and activities are pushed through to this new administration so that the work is not stymied. So I really appreciate our time together working and you being here to introduce the candidates. And so without any further ado, Mariko Lockhart.
Thank you, Kelly, and it's been a great journey together, and I know we're both have learned a lot along the way. I appreciate you as a colleague. I'm proud to join the Rsgi Change Team co-leads and the Rsgi team in welcoming our two mayoral candidates to this unique forum. We have two candidates with deep knowledge of city government, primarily from the perspective of the legislative branch, which gives them some purview into how city departments work and what issues are important to city workers. Since the role of the mayor as head of the executive branch most directly influences the life of departments and the city workforce, in this employee-led candidate forum, candidates must respond to questions from who may potentially be their future workforce and Rsgi champions. I have the honor of introducing them to you now, following which we will have some important context and history of how we got here before we jump into the question and answer segment. So starting first with Lorena Gonzalez. She is a first-generation American raised by migrant farm workers from Michoacan, Mexico, in central Washington. She is a proud Latina woman who has always fought to make sure that families and communities like hers are not left behind by those in power. Growing up, Seattle was her dream, and she dedicated herself to it as she worked her way through college, got her law degree from Seattle U, became a civil rights attorney, and started her family here. She ran for city council, and in 2015 was the first Latina elected to a citywide position in Seattle with an overwhelming majority of the vote. She got to work bringing people together to pass paid family leave and expand pre-K and LGBTQ rights, protections for victims of sexual abuse, election reforms, and pandemic assistance for workers and small businesses. She is proud to now be running to be the very first woman of color to serve as mayor of Seattle. Seattle is at a crossroads, and now is the time for bold progressive action that overcomes the status quo and paves the pathway to Seattle's collective shared prosperity. A Seattle where diversity is our strength, all kinds of businesses can grow, and our jobs pay a living wage. A Seattle that leads the world in protecting our climate, has safe, affordable housing for all its people, and transforms criminal justice and public safety to meet this civil rights moment. A Change Team highlight is that Lorena has met with the Change Team co-leads to engage in dialogue and hear their concerns. Bruce Harrell is the biracial son of an African-American father who was one of the first Black union linemen at Seattle City Light, and an Asian-American mother whose family immigrated from Japan, who was incarcerated at Minidoka during World War II and who worked for the Seattle Public Library. Bruce grew up in the redlined Central District, was valedictorian at Garfield High School, earned a football scholarship to the University of Washington, and graduated from UW undergrad and law school. Elected to the City Council in 2007, Bruce was a leader on issues of racial equity, public safety reform, and economic educational opportunity for all. He sponsored the law to ban the box, led efforts to pass Seattle's first bias-free police law, and to ensure body cameras for all SPD officers, and championed Seattle's Race and Social Justice Initiative, requiring all Seattle policies to be reviewed through an equity lens. Bruce pushed for the pilot program that eventually became the Seattle Promise, providing free college education to Seattle public school students, and he originated the Great Student Initiative to provide 20,000 Seattle public school students access to computers and high-speed internet. He helped lead negotiations to pass the $15 minimum wage and supported other groundbreaking pieces of legislation to advance support for workers and small businesses before retiring from the council in 2019. A change team highlight for Bruce. As council president, Bruce asked that change team's annual presentations to council include workforce demographic data, which has now become a regular component of their annual presentations. As I mentioned before, we're going to hear some context and history of Rsgi and how we got here before we jump into the question and answer segment with our candidates. So I'm going to turn it over to Tamar, Zere, and Kyana Wheeler, two women I have the great fortune to work with and whom I greatly admire. Tamar is the manager for our Race and Social Justice Initiative, so citywide. Her wisdom, insight, coaching, organizing, and supporting of all departments, department leadership, staff, change teams, is truly one of the greatest assets I think our city has. And she works with an incredible team. Kyana Wheeler is a senior, maybe the most senior member of that team, and also provides probably every aspect of support that Rsgi does. She has participated in change team, core team, as she's a trainer and a facilitator, and provides support and technical assistance to our department. So you are certainly in wonderful hands to get some context and history of the Race and Social Justice Initiative.
Thank you, Mariko. That was a really beautiful and loving introduction into Rsgi, the team, and this section of the history that will be the context for today's conversation. My name is Tamar Zere. I've been with the city for 6.5 years. I came, I think, a little bit after you, Lorena. And in my time here, I've seen this work just really bloom in such important ways. And so this is such a testament to this bloom, this deepening of the initiative. The Race and Social Justice Initiative at the City of Seattle is our attempt to answer government's role in eliminating institutional and structural racism within the city. And it's also our abiding promise to actually really figure out a problem that's been plaguing us for 400 years in this country. Launched in 2004, emerging from longtime community organizing and undoing institutional racism and workshops by the People's Institute for Northwest for Survival and Beyond, Seattle was the first city to undertake an effort that focused explicitly on institutional racism. Since then, King County, other cities, including Minneapolis, Madison, San Francisco, Austin, and Portland, have all established their own racial equity initiatives. Rsgi's long-term goal is to change the underlying conditions that give rise to the race-based disparities to achieve racial equity across Seattle. Kyana Wheeler, who is a longtime participant of the initiative as a worker, but also as part of the think tank that is Rsgi, 20 years, right? Yeah. And she's been with us at that Seattle Office for Civil Rights for the last 5 years. Will now sort of take over and get deeper into what this history is.
Thank you, Tamar. I'm really grateful to be here and be part of this history conversation. Like Tamar said, my name is Kyana Wheeler, and I'm with the Race and Social Justice Initiative in the Seattle Office for Civil Rights. The Seattle Office for Civil Rights leads the Race and Social Justice Initiative that supports departments and staff citywide. This includes providing support for departments, helping with technical assistance, and supporting city leadership in applying racial equity toolkit analysis and tracking departmental work plans and community indicators, as well as providing capacity building and leadership development. The Rsgi initiative with the city seeks to change those underlying conditions within the city. To do so, we have had to build infrastructure throughout the city that can support that change. That Rsgi infrastructure across city departments provides change teams and core teams with that support departmentally. The core team, a racial equity leadership program, represents various departments and are given additional training to support and ensure that the racial equity subject matter expertise is built within those departments. These subject matter experts not only build our city's capacity, but they also serve as historians for the work. These historians help ground us in the important history of our 17 years of collective effort for racial justice, in which, when we started, had no roadmap forward. We've learned a lot of lessons and have a lot of information and awareness to provide. Having been here myself as a baby of Rsji, I often say the city raised me. I understand how vital it is that we're rooted in that history, that we understand where we come from in order to make sense of where we need to go. This very moment right now is the accumulation of that history. And it's important that we recognize that it is a part of how we navigate moving forward. So without further ado, I would also like to introduce an amazing historian, someone that I've worked very closely with, but also has had, I've had the opportunity to learn so much from. And we often call Natalie Hunter the living library, as she continues to share all of the history and the documentation and the learnings that Rsgi has to offer. I'm going to hand it to Tamar to provide a little background on Natalie.
Natalie is a rarity. She was born and raised in Seattle. She grew up in the Madrona Rsji neighborhood. She started working with the city through a community-based organization, Seattle Urban League, and Seattle Opportunity Industrialization Center, currently named Seattle Vocational Technical College. She's been with Seattle Municipal Courts, the Engineering Department, and now SPU. As an early adopter, Natalie was organized into Rsgi in 2005. In her own words, it was something I never heard of before and wanted to learn more about it. She considers herself fortunate to have been on the ground floor with racial justice work at the city and was instrumental in helping to create 17 years of Rsgi work. Natalie has facilitated Rsgi trainings, conversations, has served as an Rsgi advisor for SPU branch equity teams, and conducted numerous racial equity toolkits. Additionally, Natalie started the Coalition of Affinity Groups Against Racial Harassment to address racial harassment that employers are struggling with in the workplace. Natalie has represented workers on the citywide anti-harassment and discrimination interdepartmental team, which was sanctioned by Mayor Durkin and Councilmember Morales. To Natalie, Councilmember Mosqueda, my apologies. To Natalie, Rsgi work and community work is important because she's seen firsthand how it can transform individuals and move work forward.
And I'm going to share a message from someone I think who really understands the work that Natalie has put in. Nate Hunter has provided us with a message. Nate is Natalie's son, but also is a city staff, a city employee, and really understands the impact of the work that Natalie has put in. Nate says, Natalie is and always has been a pillar of strength and knowledge in the race and social justice community at the city. She has remained on the forefront of change across the city, often working with council members, mayors, directors, and employee groups. She has dedicated her life's work to empowering the customer and the employee. Our experience here would not be the same if it weren't for leaders just like Natalie, inspiring and setting the example for the rest of us. Thank you to Nate.
Thank you, Nate. So Natalie, how did you get your start at the city?
Ooh, through programs that were government-led. When Reagan came in, he cut all the job training jobs, and the city of Seattle froze their jobs so that we can have first crack at it. I applied on the last day, got the job, and I'm here 40 years later still. And I would say the training that I got from the Seattle Opportunities Industrialization Center and accounting and office machines, I still use those skills to this day. It was a very good program there. And with the Urban League, they're the ones that got me the job interviews to this. So they have been both instrumental in me working here at the city and being successful from what I learned and the support that I got from them. So those organizations are really important to helping our community members get jobs. I think it's really important.
Thank you, Natalie.
And Natalie, I have a question for you as well.
Okay.
When I first started with the city, the Race and Social Justice Initiative was new. When the Race and Social Justice Initiative came, you had already been working for the city. It came sort of in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you get an entry into RSGI work? And if you could connect that for me around that bridge to change.
Okay, I was fortunate to be in Seattle Public Utilities, and Seattle Public Utilities was a pilot department, a big department. We had about almost 1,400 employees then. We had a really good leadership from the very top. Sharon White was the first and only deputy director for Seattle Public Utilities, and she helped lead that program. We work with building the whole initiative from the ground floor up, so we're like the architects along with Seattle Office for Civil Rights. At that point in time, it was Mickey Fern, Jermaine Cumberton, who was the head of SOCR then, Darlene Flynn, Robin D'Angelo, Jackie Lorenzar. Oh my, just so many incredible people that were here building that. And, so all the training and stuff, we developed it together as a partnership to do this work. So, with Racial Equity Toolkits, with the training that we did, getting it out, going back and redoing things, and adding more training and stuff, we all did that at Seattle Public Utilities with Seattle Office for Civil Rights. We also got to take a lot of training with the People's Institute for Undoing Institutional Racism, with Crossroads Ministries. We had really deep training from them to do the work, developed our change team, but what made it really successful was that partnership and what the department heads really supporting us on doing this work. Without their support, I don't think we would have been as successful as we have been. We had the first racial equity group called Environmental Justice and Service Equity, now is what the division is called. And it was the first group that was dedicated solely to undoing institutional racism, working on disparities, doing community engagement, and most of the Rsji work, in addition to the change team, which is another creation that came out of us from the ground floor. So we had great leadership with Sharon White and Darlene and Elliot and all those guys there. It was really critical to building this work. Actually took it on the road, went across the nation, and it was interesting to go in different venues and see that they were using the tools that we created for racial equity toolkits, and people were taking it on. And actually, Larry Gossett and others were on our first event that we did that was for city employees. They said, wow, you guys are doing something like this, and they picked it up as well. So it's just been an amazing journey. And, you know, the biggest thing to make us successful is we have to have that support from the top and be able to do what we needed to do with that. So it's been a lot of work. And I liked it so much that I really got into getting all the educational material and supplying that, advanced and went into the citywide Race and Social Justice Core team to learn more, to learn how to do other things. So from there, we learned about, you know, power dynamics, facilitation. We each had a thing that we had to focus on for the city, a project. I forgot what oh yeah, a practicum that we had to do that we did with I was on the WePAC thing, and we worked on removing the requirement that anybody that worked for the city had to have like a driver's license, which is not necessary, and just other different things that we've done. I got to meet people all over the city, with Kyana being like a really good friend, being on the core team with her, but you know, just met a lot of amazing people. Was there when Bruce Harrell brought in Dr. Nichols and had that at the council's office, which he's an amazing person to work with, and we just like got to bring in so many people, whether it's Dr. Nichols, Shakti Butler, who we use her material a lot with cracking the codes and making whiteness visible. God, there's so many people that I can think of. Tim Wise, brought him here a lot. The anti-racist white allies group got started out of this as well. The affinity groups also helped us do this work. The best thing is the partnerships that we have with all the employees across all the city departments. We really work really well and support each other. We help with facilitation and helping them with their events and things. The summit that came out of it is just amazing. It's just something that keeps growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I was like really amazed to see the co-leads team, because I haven't been there for a while. It's got so much diversity. I was just so happy to see the citywide co-leads and just to meet more people. It just got bigger and bigger. You know, there were times when it felt like they were trying to like kind of slow us down a little bit, but the Rsj community and the city they just got bigger and tighter and dug their heels in and did more work, worked with a lot of other people. So it's a journey that doesn't end. Yes.
Natalie, thank you for that comprehensive response. That's such rich history. This, you know, an important principle of racial justice work is that we actually be able to hold history. And so you make it possible when you're able to tell such a full and whole story about how Rsgi came to be. My curiosity right now, I'm going to go a little bit off script, is you talk a lot about facilitation and trainings that you've done. That you've done? Mm-hmm. Okay. But I'm curious about some of the policy work that you've engaged in. You know, your bio mentions the anti-harassment, IDT, but what other policy work have you spearheaded in the last 17 years that's, you know, racial justice centered?
Oh, I would just think pretty much the work I did with the anti-harassment team. We do racial equity toolkits in my department, so we do lots of those. And right now we're trying to get an RSJ ordinance done, because with all this work that we've done, we've never had that. The council, a while back, early on, passed a resolution. We've had 2 executive orders, the first one starting with Mayor Murray, the second one with Mayor Durkin, but we never had an ordinance, so that's a big task that the change team and the Seattle Silence Breakers is working on now, because it's really needed. Because the problem is it's not mandatory to do this work. Only bits and pieces of it are. So even if you do a racial equity toolkit, it doesn't mean you don't have to do the things that are discovered in there. You just report on it, and those things are really critical. Each department kind of treats it differently. Some are real serious about doing the work. Others is just something to check off on a list, and we're like, this initiative is too important to our constituents, our customers, our residents, and everybody, and we need to do better with that. And for the employees, and it needs to really be consistent, it needs to be funded, because a lot of people are volunteers that are on change teams. They don't have enough resources, enough people to really do the work on a regular basis, so we need to bump it up and make it so that it's law. It's something that they have to do and that they're accountable, and there's things that they actually have to produce from it. So that's some of the things we're working on right now.
And Natalie, this sort of piggybacks off of that question. You know, you spoke about 40 years of work with the city.
Yeah.
And we know, and I know, having worked so much with you, that most of that came from volunteering to do race and social justice work, because it was in addition to our regular jobs. Because of the history, there has been push so that now we have paying positions to work on race and social justice. But early at that time, you had noted that it was necessary, before there were these positions, it was necessary that there was partnerships with leadership and directors, and the essence of how necessary resources and expectations of this work are. We often call that leaders walking the talk.
Absolutely.
Rather than just talking the talk. And we found so much how necessary that is. So over this whole time span, whether it was volunteering and doing the work of Race and Social Justice Initiative within the department, or whether it was through a paid position, what have been the fruits of this labor, of your labor?
Oh, so the biggest fruits is being able to get people to really understand the importance of this and why we need to do this, and just seeing the light turn on and like, oh yeah, this is important. I understand this now, you know, where they didn't before. You know, and the historical aspects of why we're here is really critical. And with them, with more people getting involved, they can influence other people. So like each department has a change team. And then with SPU, we took it to another level. We added branch equity teams because we needed to get out into all our lines of business: water, drainage and wastewater, solid waste, and engineering. And we had like 80 people in that effort. So now we're in our second group now. So now we're at like 160 people, and people are more involved. When they're doing their work, they're saying, oh, okay, in this community, we need to do this. We didn't know that this existed. We need to engage them differently. We need to look at, you know, what kind of amenities are they getting when we come in and do our work, or what kind of things are we doing that are harming them. You know, like there's the big fiasco that happened on 23rd when they were tearing up the streets and the impacts they were having. One person comes to mind, Mary, that had the flower shop. You know, you can't shut water off and stuff when it's her holiday, her periods, you know, looking in there and beauty shops and different things. And then, you know, how we engage with people. Now you get people that are more involved through racial equity toolkits, through education and stuff, that now know when they go do a project in the city, it's not just something I have to do, you know, it's just part of the maintenance. But okay, when I go into this community, what is it going to look like? How am I going to affect it? How am I going to communicate to these people that may be needed to be communicated differently? How am I going to work with community-based organizations to make sure that we're giving the community, you know, what they need and the best service? So it just goes on, and it's just good to just see just different people picking up and the lights going on. And now we don't need to be there holding their hands as the racial equity advisors. Now they can pick up and do this, and then they're teaching others and things. So yeah, it's contagious now. Yep. Change, you have to have that contagious commitment.
I love that, Natalie. So what's you know, we've got our two candidates here. You know, what do you want to say to them about the future of this work and what it's meant to you?
To keep it up, because I ain't gonna be here that much longer. But no, we really need help at your level, because you know what you did with us for the anti-harassment discrimination team made a big difference. I don't think we wouldn't have got anything done to the level that we did there without you guys supporting us on that. in there. And, it was really critical that you guys said, we're going to do this. We looked at your recommendations, we're going to adopt everything, so we need the same thing, trying to get this RSGI ordinance committed and making departments actually accountable and actually producing stuff and actually changing the engagement inside the city with the employees and outside the city with our customers and residents and visitors and everything. It's really important. And for us to do this work, we need to, it needs to be equitable inside and outside the city. Because when we first started the initiative, we're like, how are we going to talk about race and social justice if everybody comes from a different place of understanding what we say when we say race? And we talk about racism and institutional racism, and the first thing that pops in their mind are, the bad actors, the KKK, all those kind of folks, instead of, no, this is how these systems were built. This is why there's disparities in the neighborhood. But now we have a common understanding of what we're actually talking about, and it's something that they can grasp. And so we really need that support and that ordinance and real accountability to have them actually do this work, for both inside and out.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Natalie. I don't even want to add anything to what Natalie said because it was just so succinct and concise and concrete. So we'll pass it off back to you, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tamar, Natalie, and Kyana. I think the really important part of your contribution is showing the connection between the past, the present, and what we hope is going to be the future. RSGI work is no joke. When the pandemic hit, let me fix this mask. When the pandemic hit, I remember for a moment we wondered if that meant that RSGI work was going to slow down. And what ended up happening was it doubled, it tripled. The demand for the RSGI work became so pronounced throughout the city. And the only way it works is if we actually keep that connection from the past going with the work that we're doing today. And we can't actually be here without acknowledging that. So I really appreciate you all being here to participate in that and putting this context in the right frame for our candidates and for our viewing public. I'll pass it on now for Iman, Ibrahim, and Denise to do the history of the Change Team co-leads.
Hi, everyone. My name is Iman Ibrahim, and I'm also on the Rsji team. So I'm going to be sharing the history of change teams. At the start of the Race and Social Justice Initiative, we had a theory that each department needed a group of change agents, change teams, that would work towards the internal transformation needed to undo institutional racism. Over the years, most, if not all, of our executive departments have recognized the pivotal role of change teams have in this work. All city departments have change teams, including city council and the mayor's office. The teams are comprised of staff members who work together to advance racial and social justice. Additionally, change teams often lead the racial equity toolkit process for their department. They nurture relationships within the department and adopt shared leadership strategies. They also establish multicultural team norms that interrupt patterns of behavior that cause inequitable outcomes. Change teams strive to broaden and deepen the impact of racial justice work and believe it is imperative to build for transformation. Every change team has designated leads that convene and facilitate change team meetings, interface with department leadership, and represent their respective change team at the Rsgi citywide monthly co-leads meeting.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Denise Colvin. I'm also with the RSGI strategy team at OCR. The RSGI network is a part of every city department. It is made up of change team members, RSGI or equity staff positions, and more. Co-leads and change team members are the RSGI boots on the ground. The co-leads understand that relationships and culture are central to institutional change. They are committed to challenging their personal racial bias and internalized racism and using their own awareness to support others. The co-leads recognize that institutional change is a long-term process. The city's organizational culture is rooted in white supremacy and other systems of oppression. We must continue to interrupt white supremacy culture within ourselves and throughout the institution. Next, we're going to begin the Q&A portion of our program. The questions have been prepared in advance, and each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer. We will be keeping time, and the moderator will ask follow-up questions as needed. We will also provide a 1-minute warning, an end-of-time warning, and a stop warning. Now we'd like to introduce you to the 3 RSGI co-leads who will be asking the change team's questions to the candidates. First, we have Julie George, who has worked for the City of Seattle for 22 years, all of which have been with the Seattle Fire Department. Currently, she works in the Human Resources Division. Julie joined the SFD RSJI Change Team in 2012 and is currently serving as one of the co-leads. Next, we have Ani Krishnan. He prefers he, him pronouns, identifies as Indian, and is an immigrant. Ani has been with the city's Office of Sustainability and Environment for 4 years, working at the intersection of climate justice and racial equity. He also co-leads his office's change team. Finally, we have Dr. Christopher Ndifon, who is a land use planner at SDCI and has been with the City of Seattle for 22 years. He has been a member of the change team for 3 years and a co-lead for 2 years. And we are so happy and grateful for you to participate in this event today. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. So question number 1 is a 3-part question that I'm going to read. You both served on the City of Seattle Council for several years. During your tenure, you witnessed the evolution of the Race and Social Justice Initiative. A, in what ways did you interact with the RSJ change teams, RSJ staff members, and other equity specialists as council members? B, reflecting on your experience as a council member, are there things you wish you could have done better to support the RSJ? And C, how do you plan to interact with RSJ change teams, RSJ staff, members, and other equity specialists as mayors?
It'll help to put on my button and unmute. Okay, so we'll start with Lorena answering the questions and move on to Bruce, and then we'll switch that up for the next question. Okay.
Great. Okay, so big question, lots of parts to that. I just want to start off by saying thank you. I already broke the mic. For me. How's that? No. How about now? Okay. All right. Just a little tiny. Can you guys hear me okay? Is this all right? All right, coming through. All right. I just wanted to say thank you so much. I really appreciated how you all started today's conversation in a way to just sort of root us in the history and the context of why this work is so important. When we do a lot of candidate forums, we just kind of dive right into questions, and I just really appreciate the thoughtful approach that you all have taken to really structure this conversation in a way that hopefully will be as meaningful as possible to those who are watching and to all of you who are organizing. So, just to get to the questions, I actually want to start by answering, with my reflections as a council member and whether or not I think there are things that I could have done better to support RSGI. And I think when we're talking about dismantling racism and anti-racist work, it's always important to acknowledge that we can always do more and that we can always do better. And while I'm proud of some of the anti-racist work that I've been able to support, either through budget actions or through policy work or through just being in relationship with city employees, whether it's in my department or in other departments, I'm really proud of all of that work, but I know that it's not enough. And I know that it's not enough because we don't live in a world that is free of racism and oppression. And we still work for an agency that perpetuates systems of oppression that disproportionately impact are brown, black, indigenous, and other communities of color. So I come to this question with that context in mind, and would say that again, the work that I've been able to do with the Rsgi change teams include, most recently last year, having had an opportunity to meet with many of you as council president, and have really good conversation about priorities and ongoing needs and frustrations about how the systems are currently not working, and really sort of trying to figure out how we can unlock a better relationship there. In our own department, we do have a change team. It has been historically unfunded and not widely supported work. So this last year, our Rsgi change team leads came to me and asked for a $45,000 investment to pay for a consultant who can really help to figure out how to institutionalize the work of Rsgi in the policy legislative development work that we're doing as a city council. And I was really honored to be able to approve that request as the council president, and we'll actually be hearing a presentation from our legislative department change team on November 29th, and I'm really excited to hear the results of that work and to have that be part of the legacy that I'm leaving behind in this space as it relates to Rsgi work. Really quickly, because I'm going to run out of time here, is how do I plan to interact with the Rsgi change teams? I used to work for an executive. I was general counsel, so I know what happens in the back rooms. I know how policy gets made, and I think that for me as mayor, I want to require that a member of every Rsgi change team related to a policy issue is present to make presentations to me as the mayor as I consider whether or not it's policy route 1, 2, or 3. So that's going to be an important part of how I center this work in policymaking and decision making.
Thank you very much, Lorena. And I hope you all don't mind that I'm calling you Lorena and Bruce. I didn't clear it before you beforehand how I would do it, so I'm just apologizing after the fact.
I've answered the worst.
Bruce, same questions.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm speaking slowly to make sure my mic is working. Got lucky. Thank all of you for inviting us both and for building community within the city. It's weird for me to come back to City Hall because I have been gone for a few years, but it feels good here to see all you fine people here. So let me sort of cut to the chase and maybe give a little context as well. To see what we're seeing now with the richness of the work that you're doing, you may recall in 2010 when I was on the council, I was elected in 2007, 2010, I was the only person of color on the council. And in that capacity, certainly had my hands full, but where we've come now with both the diversity on the council and the degree to which the deep dive in this work is being done is phenomenal. My mother and father worked for the city, as I think was mentioned in my bio, and back then it was a different conversation. Certainly racism and hiring and retention, the same issues we're grappling with now were talked about, but in perhaps a different context, and we've learned so much more. I had lunch this afternoon with Norm Rice, our first African-American mayor, and this afternoon we talked about how things have changed and how they have not. So let me answer your questions. I typically dealt with the Rsgi change teams in both formal and informal ways that, of course, as mentioned in my bio, I sort of suggested as a policy that we have the departments bring their Rsgi teams to the table to talk to us about what they were working on, what their goals were. And there was over the 30 departments, they were sort of all over the map, but all doing rich work. And I would openly say how advanced some were and how others can learn from other departments. Because quite frankly, it's the level of engagement and passion and perhaps resources that the department head were given the change teams that sort of resulted, I think, in a varying degrees of work throughout the city. I saw that inconsistency, and then I had required from a budget standpoint that departments report on their demographic makeup, on how well they are doing to hire and retain, and what their Rsgi accomplishments were. And so, that's sort of a good segue in what I could have done better. Well, I found that most of my greatest learning is not informal setups like that with the mics going on and the cameras on. Most of the best learning I've had are in coffee shops and in homes and in taking a walk in a park or something. And so what I could have done better perhaps is be just more accessible to people, to walk 2, 3, 4, 5 of us together and talk through issues, build those relationships. I could always do a better job in that sense. And I see she's grabbing that end time thing. So how will I plan on interacting with the change teams? Just like that, informally as much as formally. And I will look forward to the relationships that I'll develop with all of you co-leads, and thank you for doing the work.
Thank you. This is your next question, Bruce and Lorena. Activism creates change. The Race and Social Justice Initiative was a result of Black community activism. Community demands and RSJI advocacy pushed the current administration to create a new participatory budgeting program, which will allow community members to help decide how the city invests millions of dollars into the community. As mayor, how will you support activism by BIPOC employees within the city and activism by BIPOC people in the community?
So, Bruce, you go first, but I want to add a qualification to this, especially considering that people get in trouble for being activists. When Black people are doing this work, they get in trouble on the job. So, especially taking that into consideration, how would you answer this question?
Was that an asterisk in the question you stuck in there, Kelly?
Big asterisk. I'm doing all the asterisks today. That's my job.
So we have to take both the retaliation laws and the whistleblower laws and things of that nature that are embedded in our civil code extremely seriously, as will I, if elected mayor, to make sure that you have the legal protections. I actually, in doing department head evaluations, one comes to mind at City Light many years ago. I wanted some candid feedback, and people were afraid of that. So to answer the question directly, number one, I have to be present. I have to talk to the communities, particularly the activist community and the BIPOC employees, many of whom are supporting me, and make sure that, quite frankly, my parents came from that community when they were much younger. I have pictures on our website, and my mother was protesting to get a light in the central district because that's where minorities lived in a red line district. And so I had come from that. My father was one of the first founders of the Black City Employees Association. So I come from a family of people who are not afraid to protest and create change. And so we have to honor that tradition, but we also have to protect people. And what we saw, I think, during the protests, the peaceful protests in many situations, how heavy-handed both the city and the police were. So my short answer will be looking at, again, the whistleblower laws, making sure that we are open and transparent in our conversation, and I am present. I marched after the George Floyd murder with my wife and 3 Black children, and we participated with community members, making sure we did not want the police there, as an example. And we sort of self-patrolled. And so under my leadership, you're going to see a strong engagement in the activist community, because most importantly, people want to be heard. I mean, they're angry, and they should be when you see someone worth $186 billion and you see someone else living in a tent or in a car somewhere. They see the inconsistencies in our societal rules, and they're saying, can't we do better? And City of Seattle, can't you do better? So I look forward to that engagement. And not only do I have to participate in it, I have to make sure that we build the community trust such that people feel as though they heard, and then we act and invest accordingly. I don't like using all my time. I'll reserve it. Can I speak longer on another question? No, it doesn't work that way, right?
No, it's not going to work that way. The time gets given up. Okay, well, then we could move on to you, Lorena. Same question.
Great. I'll just start off by saying that I got the bug for wanting to be a public servant because I was an activist, and I came up through the immigrant rights movement in this city, and was deeply involved in the organizing work and the movement building work within the immigrant and refugee community, particularly with One America and with other, multicultural, multiracial organizations that really, spend time in investing in our future leaders in our community and in our future activists in our community. And I think it's important for me to identify as an activist because we now live in a very polarized world, a world in which activism is now dirty, where it is not respected, where we are devalued because we fight every day to push against the status quo for the change that will not be given to us, but for the change we must demand if we are serious about anti-racism work. And that's how I'm going to lead as mayor in this city. I am not going to accept no as an answer on these changes that need to happen to allow for shared prosperity and dignity and respect and honor of our communities of color. We have long been left out of investment. We have long been left out of the conversations, and there is no more time for mere consultation. Now is the time to center our voices, our needs, in both action and investment every single day in every policy decision we consider at the City of Seattle. And our employees, you, our frontline workers, are the boots on the ground that bring that information to decision makers for us to make informed, educated, community-driven decisions that are going to work every single day to dismantle racism in our own house and in our communities. And that, to me, is the calling of this important work, and it's the obligation of the next mayor to center that in everything she does to make sure that we are not going back to the way it was before, because the way it was before COVID didn't serve us either. And COVID has just made it worse. Even within our own house, we see inequities, right? And so when the silence breakers come out, when our employees band together to sue the City of Seattle because of discrimination, because of lack of promotion, because of inequities in pay, it is the responsibility of the mayor to make sure that she is taking seriously those concerns and resourcing things like the Office of Employee Ombudsman and other resources to make sure that those addresses, those workplace cultural issues are being addressed and handled, and that we don't we don't create punitive consequences for employees for speaking up, but we hold their managers and their supervisors accountable for not addressing the workplace culture expectations that are dictated by the mayor on day one. And for me, that's going to be critically important. It's why I'm so proud to be endorsed by ProTech 17 and by many of the other unions representing city employees. And I'm going to work with them and you all to make sure your activism is protected.
Thank you so much, Lorena. We could move on to you, Dr. Ndifon. But right before we do that, I just want to say, we should really note and that, we've been really clear that this forum is with you all, but it's also for the Rsgi network and for the employees that are watching and streaming. And so I want to make something really clear that the folks that are listening, the mavens that are listening, I don't know if you all remember Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, but he talks about mavens. These mavens are in the crowd and they are listening and they're going to hold not just you, but us, the folks who are doing RSGI work accountable for this stuff. And they're listening to what you're saying. And so I want the employees that are watching to also have a sense of that and to know that that's okay. It's okay to hold us accountable to what you're hearing here today. And that's it. So I'll move on to question 3, Dr. Ndifon, if you can do that.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Bruce. Analyzing power is an important principle of anti-racist work. The People Institute of Survival and beyond define power as the legitimate control of or access to those institutions sanctioned by the state. When power enters the room, it stifles conversation, discourages honesty, and harms Rsgi work. As a chief executive of the city, how will your institutional power to encourage frontline staff members, change team members, and others to engage in challenging conversation with you?
And we start this one with Lorena.
Great. I really love this question because I think it really does create the thread of what I've been talking about already, which is that that the CEO of the city, the next mayor, it's incumbent upon her to really create the space that is regular and sustainable to allow for these conversations to happen. And while I think informal conversations are important, a lot of the sort of movement in business does happen within formal settings. And so I do think it's important that the next mayor do things, for example, like requiring that a member of an RSGI change team from a respective department who's making a presentation, a policy briefing on a particular, policy direction to the mayor be present to direct addressly head on, how is this advancing our commitment to being an anti-racist city and government and institution? So I think that's a critical part of the work, but I also think that, the fundamental question here is, how are you gonna be challenged? Right, you are in a position of power, and anybody who's worked for me or with me knows that I want people to tell it to me straight. Are we going down the right path? Or are we going down the wrong path? And that's important because it's going to make better policy for all of us. And so being able to hear no to me and accept no, being able to hear it and accept no when it needs to be said is fundamental to leadership, and to leadership that can be restorative and trauma-informed and produce less harm in our communities. So that's how I want to be able to lead, and how I want to have conversations with people who are subject matter experts in areas that I can't be a subject matter expert in all the time, right? That's my responsibility, is to leverage and invest and benefit from your all's subject matter expertise in your area of profession to be able to make the best informed decisions for the people of our city and for our own employees. And so I am going to continue to look to all of you as the change team. I'm going to put this out there that if elected mayor, I would welcome an opportunity specifically around this to identify a way in which we can create that structure of a loop back information back and forth. I don't want to dictate it, but I do want to learn from what the change team thinks has worked in the past and could work in the future to allow for this kind of challenging conversation to occur and for us to be moving in the same direction on this really difficult but collective work.
Thank you so much. And your turn, Bruce.
Thanks, Kelly. So there's a powerful statement in this question. I want to bring attention to this sentence. When power enters the room, it stifles conversation, discourages honesty, and harms the RSGI work. That's a powerful statement that the doctor read. I have to be mindful of that when I was first elected in 2007, entered office 2008, an interesting dynamic occurred, and as my 12-year career down here developed, a personal thing had happened one time as I was around some people, and this other person said, well, Bruce Harrell didn't speak to me. And the person said, well, he's pretty approachable, He said, yeah, but I was in a meeting, he didn't speak to me. And he was right, I didn't speak to him. I didn't know him. But I said, well, did he speak to me? And I had the conversation. I went with the person. I said, I didn't mean to offend you if I didn't speak to you. But it occurred to me that I was in a position of power. And perhaps that came with a level of intimidation. And I did not realize it. I did not consciously realize it. And I have to work better at that, realizing that what a person may see in a position of power may be different than what I intend. And so as a mayor, I want to be as approachable to everyone. And quite frankly, a narrative that is very true about me is I treat the janitor and the CEO alike. I don't know how to do it any better. But sometimes I may not even speak to a CEO. Sometimes I'm reserved in certain situations as well. I don't know if you know anything about birth order. I'm the youngest in my family. So they always say the youngest are the spoiled ones. They say that. The older siblings always say that. the dynamic of power. I read a book, I think many of you might have read it. It's a good read, The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. And in that book, it is analyzed how power doesn't like to concede itself, right? People who are in power, that it comes with a high price. So in this RSGI work that I hope to lead with you, we will analyze where it is often abused, consciously or subconsciously. That's the deeper work, that's the richer work, because sometimes we just don't see it, and that's the institutional work. The hiring decision of Chief Scoggins was interesting. I was very involved in that. I was on the search team, and we had a certain criteria that we thought would produce a good fire chief. As it turned out, it disallowed him from preventing, because he had come from, I think, Richmond, California, Richdale, something like that, a smaller city. And we had looked at smaller cities, we excluded them, realizing that a lot of people in that particular industry, the fire industry, they may not have been in bigger cities. And so we didn't mean to exclude this person, but we did through our process. I got to stop there.
Thank you very much, Bruce.
I see that end time sign. I was in the middle of the story.
Yeah, no, the end time came, and I think we're going to keep going. We'll keep going, and I think that there's just natural things that'll pop up that'll probably we'll have a chance to maybe address as we go along in the program. But for now, we can move on to the next question, Julie. But thank you, Bruce.
As government workers doing anti-racist work, we strive to serve communities most harmed by systemic racism. After the murder of George Floyd in 2020, the Change Team co-leads wrote correspondence to Mayor Jenny Durkan in support of Black and brown activism on the street, who are calling to divest from the police and invest in the communities of color. This correspondence was supported by the RSJ infrastructure and several affiliated and allied groups. How have the events of the past year, specifically the COVID-19 pandemic and movement for Black Lives Matter, changed your perspective on racial justice?
Okay, so this goes to Lorena first. Are we there now? Is that no, Bruce? Is it you first? All right. So you all help me keep track, because now I'm getting into the conversation.
No, it's my turn to go first, but I have to admit, this is number 4, correct?
Yes.
Question number 4. So there's 3 parts to 4, A, B, and C, right? No, there's not.
Just A.
No, I'm sorry. Got my thing.
There's only A.
Around? There you go.
Okay.
All right, so that's what we have. And the assumption, of course, is that the events of the last year have had some kind of profound effect on you all, as it has on the rest of us. And just what is that?
Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if it's changed my perspective on racial justice. Perhaps enlightened it. I've said this publicly, that I grew up in an era, bear with me a little bit here, that we said, black is beautiful. That was our mantra. And then we said, black power. And we listened to music that would say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. And so when the Black Lives Matter statements had come out as a result of the militaristic police department showing this world how racist they are, as one movie star said, what is controversial about that? I mean, how is, if a person chooses to take a knee, how does that offend your rights? So I think what changed for me was, again, under the Trump administration, showing again the soft underbelly and continued racism in this country. I think what changed for me was an increased enlightenment of how much racism is still overt. It incentivized me and others in my community to do even more. And when we marched into George Floyd protests, and saw our country implode over this, it just gave me, I suppose, a heightened and renewed enlightenment again, as I said to Norm Rice over lunch today, how much we've changed, but how much we have not changed. And I think that was the enlightenment, that was my takeaway during the movement. Good.
Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate that. Okay, on to you, Lorena.
Thanks, Kelly. You know, as someone who was in a position of power last year, and sorry, we get really emotional when I think about this. As someone who was in a position of power last year, dealing like all of our community members with the devastating impacts of COVID, and I myself had just had a baby, and I actually left my maternity leave early because of the pandemic, and then the murder of George Floyd happened. And last year was the hardest year of my public service. I had a protest in front of my house. I had to leave a nursing baby to meet the call of duty. I had to look in the eyes of young Black activists who were demanding that we do better. I had to read an email inbox with over 55,000 emails in one day demanding that we divest from the police department and invest in our Black and brown communities. I had to live with the reality that we received 18,000 complaints as a result of the horrendous acts of this police department of brutalizing peaceful protesters in our city, including subjecting children to tear gas. All of that in the context of knowing that our communities were being ravaged by this pandemic, that we were losing elders, aunties and uncles to COVID, and that we had parents mourning the loss of their children who had been killed by government. So I have evolved greatly in this area as somebody who was a civil rights attorney for many years, for a decade before coming to the council. I was a staunch believer in reformer. And when all of this happened, I fundamentally evolved in my thinking that reform was no longer enough, that we must transform our policing systems, and that inherently includes budget accountability, and it includes being responsive to the demands to no longer simply write a blank check to institutions and agencies that have historically, systemically upheld oppression and racism within our communities. So while at every other forum, my opponent has criticized me for agreeing with communities' demands to reduce the police budget, I stand with community in our effort to correct these systems and to put money in our communities while still upholding public safety, but acknowledging that it's important for us to continue the hard work of transforming these policing systems that have created and continue to create great harm for us all.
Thank you, Lorena. I'm going to take this opportunity to do my little moderation jump in, and I'm going to ask a question that I feel is one of those questions that could get me in trouble, but it comes on the heels of the activism question and this question about how the movement for Black Lives might have changed you, and it's really about, I think the simplest way I could ask this question is, are we going to see tear gas and that sort of stuff again on the streets if this kind of activism happens? Because I think that that's one of the deepest things that affected us as employees, was that we felt that we were here working for the city and we were seeing our family hurt on the streets, and they would look at us and say it was us. It was us who was doing it. And we want to know if that'll happen again, if we're going to be held culpable for that sort of thing under your watch, because that's what happened to us this time. 30 seconds each. Bruce first.
No.
Why?
Well, I think the City Hall have acknowledged the unlawfulness of the weaponry that has been used, the suppression tools and weapons that have been used, and realized that our nation is going through a country discussing the unlawfulness of those tools. And I think the narrative is changing through our leaders to realize that is not the appropriate or fair or kind or humane way to deal with peaceful protests.
Thank you, Bruce. Lorena, your turn.
No, and I was part of the effort at the city council to ban the acquisition and the use of tear gas by this police department, a weapon that is used in war and has been outlined by the Geneva Convention should not be used against our own people. And I think it is completely inappropriate to tear gas members of our community who are seeking to do nothing more than to stand up for racial equity and justice, and it will not be tolerated under a González administration.
Thank you so much for answering that question, you both.
You called it inaudible.
Thank you both. This is your next question. None of us have ever lived in a racially just society. Anti-racist work is flexible, ever evolving, and exists on the cutting edge of activism. When doing RSGI work, we often say, we are not the experts, but we have expertise. Where are your blind spots in anti-racism work, and in what areas do you think you will need more support? I think we're going with Lorena first, and then Bruce.
Sorry, I'm still processing the last question. Sorry for my delay. You know, I think when we all have worked on the inside for as long as we have, the fact that we are part of the institution is like one massive blind spot. And it's easy to rely on the systems that you're comfortable with, on the people that you're used to speaking to. And I think that's a blind spot in the work related to anti-racism is you know, being in a sort of ivory tower that really insulates you from what's actually happening in our workforce, what's our workforce is hearing from community as being the needs and the priorities. And so for me, you know, making sure that there are lots of areas of input to make sure that those blind spots are minimized or eradicated is really important. And so I think for me in the work of anti-racism, I would also say that as a woman of color but a non-Black member of our community, you know, centering voices of Black folks throughout our city and our workforce is really important as a strategy towards really becoming a true anti-racist organization that is going to center our investments and our policy on solutions that are gonna benefit those who are furthest away from justice and prosperity, and who are unfortunately also the closest to oppression and racism. And so I need all of the support from the entire city family to be able to, you know, deliver on the promise of shared prosperity for those of us who've been excluded from it all our lives. And so I would rely heavily on this network, certainly, and on, you know, training opportunities to continue to always make sure that this is an iterative process of working our own inherent biases, and on, you know, really taking serious as part of leadership and development what it means to be anti-racist. And for me, that means, you know, always subjecting myself into a place of understanding that I have not learned all I can learn, and that there are more pieces of this work that I can learn from people who do anti-racist work that really can make me a better leader.
The mute and the unmute is getting me every time. Thank you so much, Lorena, for answering. All right, Bruce, your turn.
Sure. So where are my blind spots in anti-racism work? I thought about that, and I struggle with it. Because I suppose if they were blind spots, I wouldn't even know what they were. I can't see them. So I interpret the question as, what can I do better? Where are my learning edges? And I suppose one of them is, that's how I'm interpreting the question, so I may be not answering the question as its intended inquiry. But I can do better, I think, in terms of when we talk about undoing institutional racism and addressing the core causes of institutional racism, I have a tendency to get impatient. And I sometimes want to jump right to the immediate solutions without doing a deeper dive into the hundreds of years of institutional racism. And I'll give you an example. That I used to routinely put money in your budget, the SOCR budget, for testing. It hadn't been done before. And I said, if we're going to have these laws on the books, our state law, RCW 4960, law against discrimination, our city ordinances to ban discrimination, I want to test them. I want to test them for housing policies, employment policies, and educational opportunities. So we, as you well know, and you all did a phenomenal job of getting the right people to test it. In District 2, the south end of Seattle, African Americans were given higher rates than non-African Americans. Same-sex couples were given higher rates than a couple of a male and female traditional couple. Racism was prevalent, unfairness and discrimination was still prevalent. Ironically, in the most diverse zip code in the country. And so while I spend a great deal of amount looking at what we can do right now, sometimes I suppose I need to take a much more expansive look on undoing many systems. And so I think that's a learning edge when I want immediate equity. And I guess another blind spot would be in our work on race issues, I believe in community empowerment as well. And if you work with me, you will see that I will inventory who's in the room, and I'll say, what resources do we have right now? Let's move the needle. We need to raise some money, let's raise some money. We need to bring some expertise, let's go find that expertise. Because I like action. I don't like to adore the question all day long. And again, it goes to my impatience for immediate justice. And so while this undoing institutional racism is critical work, it's the deeper work. I suppose at the end of the day, I also realize that time is a precious commodity and I want immediate results as well.
Thank you both for answering. Yeah, there are several dozen, employees that are listening that want to know how best they could support you in this endeavor. And so, that question is, again, as much for you all as it is for the folks that are listening on. So thank you so much for responding. I think we move on to question number 6.
So on this round, we'll start with Bruce.
Yes.
Successful governance require ongoing engagement between the mayor's office, the executive departments, and the community most impacted by operation. There are four-part question here. What is your vision of learning into the expertise and wisdom of the city workforce, many of whom work directly with the community? 1. Then how will you mobilize your cabinet members and other city leaders to address important Rsgi issues? That's 2. As the mayor, how would you seek out feedback about your racial justice work? That's number 3. Other than listening, what would you do if you were told that your policies have caused or was causing harm to people and community of color? Number 4.
I want to say one thing before you answer, Bruce. This is a big governance question, so can we add 1 more minute? 4 minutes? Okay, thank you.
I'm going to call you the Russell Wilson of moderators here. You just make it up as you go.
You got to be slick. You got to be quick.
Okay, I appreciate the extra time. So part of my vision for leaning into the expertise of the workforce is, quite candidly, you may recall that several years ago, the city, what we started for my office is we started celebrating Black History Month as a city. And we traditionally had been doing things with the county. The county sort of always led. They had the big thing at Garfield and other places. And we took it upon ourselves to do what's called a tin cup approach. I'd go to different departments and we'd ask for money, and we brought in Angela Davis as an example, and we brought in Ilyasa Shabazz, Malcolm X's daughter, as an example. Hill Harper, the activist an actor who went to school with Obama, and we were doing this, and I say that to say that that was a means not just to hear from these great speakers to inspire us, but to have fun in this process. I believe that this serious work is sustainable when we enjoy the journey together, because the work is so serious. So my vision is that we start doing events, a series of events where we not only talk about the seriousness of racism and institutional problems, but we celebrate the work that we're doing together. So I hope to be a leader in that. The cabinet member question is an interesting one, because when Mayor McGinn was elected, and he came in, as you may recall, on a strong environmental platform, and he was opposing the viaduct, which is the controversy of the year then. Do we build it? Do we dig a tunnel? Do we put a surface option on board? And it was splitting the city up in 3 ways. And so I did not know him personally, and I didn't know his stance on race and social justice. So what I did was, we had many of the department heads, the diverse department heads, primarily African American, throughout the city, and we started meeting at my home. And we said, well, what does it look like if we are to embrace diversity? Because I just didn't know the executive stance there. So you'll see a continued approach of personalizing and informalizing relationships under the Harrell administration to get the real work done. And I also say, in organizations, the informal leaders, it could be a rank and file person, could be an administrative, a support person. It makes no difference to me. We don't believe in levelism. That trying to informalize relationships sometimes is where the real answers come from. If I want to know how an organization is doing, sometimes I'll talk to people down lower in the hierarchy to figure out, as my children say, the real deal. So you're going to see a level of engagement that's not just levelistic in my approach at all, but certainly I will engage them thoroughly. Seeking the feedback is just simply that making sure that you can communicate to my administration without fear of retaliation, and you can communicate with whatever manner you'd like, whether it's a telephone call, an email, an in-person coffee visit, but we want that feedback. Feedback is not definition, it's just feedback. So we want to get better, and we open up our doors for that. And quite candidly, I think I have a history of doing that for 12 years. I pride myself in being accessible to people. Heck, I was just born a few miles from here. I mean, I'm not going anywhere, and I say that publicly, that's the fun part of this job. This is a tough job, make no mistake about that. But the fun part is just engaging with people that have a beautiful vision for the city. And last, other than listing, what would you do if you were told that your policies have caused or causing harm? Well, you know what? We have to self-correct. I will tell you that I'm human. We make mistakes. And I think the last thing we could do is try to portray ourselves such that we don't make mistakes and we're not subject to mistakes. And so if we need to course correct, the public will understand, and we course correct. And if you're leading with creativity, you may make a misstep here or there.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Ooh, I lost my voice. Thank you so much, Bruce. Appreciate it. Lorena, your turn. 4 minutes.
Great, thank you so much. I think in my answer, I'm going to sort of separate how do you respond if folks are telling you that your policies have caused harm from the other aspects of the question. And I would just start off by saying that this work of engaging our workforce and of requiring accountability by cabinet members and leaders in the city to address RSGI issues cannot be performative. And that's a hard thing to do when you're a politician, because so much of what we do is performance. And so I just want to be honest that, you know, there have been times in my city council role where people have said, hey, we would like for you to advance XYZ resolution, or maybe, you know, I think I have a brilliant idea and I'm like, I'm going to do this resolution. And then we reach out to OCR partners and other agency partners, and what we hear back sometimes is, you know what, that's probably not a good idea. And let me tell you why. And I share that example because that's how our work actually happens day to day at the city. You know, I'm sure you all can think of at least a dozen examples of where you have, you know, prevented something from happening that could have created more harm. And I don't share that story to say that people have ill intent or ill will in wanting to lift up some of the issues that are happening in our community. But I do think that it's important for leaders, for people in positional power, to one, think of the fact that they need to reach out to our subject matter experts in the departments, and then two, really do that in a way that is not performative, that is not just like, well, I checked with so-and-so, and yeah, they had concerns, but I checked with them, right? It has to be a true relationship where you are listening to the feedback that's coming back and negotiating, if there is negotiation to be had, about whether there is an alternative approach, whether there is a way to correct the approach. And those types of real relationships are facilitated by the people the mayor chooses to hire as part of her administration. Because a mayor can't do all of these things by herself and on her own. So who I choose to hire, and the marching orders that individual or those individuals have about how this is how we will govern, is critically important to changing the culture around just doing performative work and doing transformational work that really does leverage and access appropriately the skills, the experience, the history, the knowledge of so many of our workers in the city who are hearing directly from community members about what is or isn't working, and who yourselves are members of our community and understand what is working and what is not working or what could be harmful. So that leads me to the last point in my last minute, which is, what do we do if you have advanced a policy that has caused harm to people in communities of color? I think it's an important opportunity for the next mayor to have a moment of truth and reconciliation, of acknowledging that harm has been caused, of saying what the harm is, and in creating a pathway to have reconciliation to allow for that harm to be corrected. And that is, you know, part of what I believe the city needs to continue to heal and to put ourselves on a path towards racial equity.
Thank you so much, Lorena. Okay, we can move on to question number 7.
Rsgi employees' surveys have established that many city employees experience trauma because of racism. Recently, the pandemic has further exposed the racial inequities in our workplaces and communities. How will you cultivate a culture of care across city departments, particularly for our first responders, such as public health personnel, construction staff, maintenance crews, and others, that centers health and well-being?
Here's my qualifier for this question. You know, something that we don't talk about often enough is that we do actually have to take care of ourselves, and black and brown people are just hurt. They're just hurt. Their health is just affected badly by doing this work and being in and around so much racist trauma and racist experiences. So that's part of the context within which we ask, how will you cultivate a culture of care across city departments, particularly with folks who are firsthand feeling this trauma. So I just wanted to put that qualifier in there. Do we remember who's going first? Okay, good. Lorena, let's go.
Wow, mental health, big question. And Kelly, you're absolutely right. As Black and brown people, we don't often consider our mental health and well-being as sort of part and parcel of just being healthy. And you know, I think this is an area where the next mayor has an opportunity to really be in stronger conversation with our frontline workers in particular, to identify things like, you know, let's call it what it is, a mental health care day, right? Like you're taking the day off, not because you're sick, not because you have a vacation day, but because you need a mental health day to restore. And you do what you need to do on your mental health day, but that's what needs to happen. In my own office now, which is small compared to the 12,000 employees that work for the city, I only have 4 employees. We practice this. We call it what it is. And we use the language that it's a mental health day to destigmatize the reality that this work is really hard and challenging, and that sometimes we just need a moment to struggle, to have that struggle on our own. And I think that, you know, the next mayor can really lead in this space by, again, promoting and destigmatizing that language, and by requiring heads of departments and divisions to really identify ways that we can destigmatize the need to take time away because we have mental health care concerns. And we need to do better at funding the mental care and the behavioral health care that people need at our city to be able to recover and be restored, because we need you all to be ready and able to do the hard work that we ask you all to do in the field every day. COVID has really exacerbated this. You know, huge inequities in our workforce as it relates to frontline workers that cannot do their job from the comfort of their living room or kitchen table. They're still out there. So one of the things that was really important to us is to acknowledge that sacrifice by compensating those employees extra for having to continue to be in the field. And we need to continue to support those kinds of acknowledgement pay efforts to make sure that people feel that their time and their sacrifices are being valued, while also coupling that with ways to destigmatize the need to take care of their own mental health.
Thank you, Lorena. Bruce?
Yeah. This is a tough one, because I get this, man, especially running for mayor and running a campaign, being attacked and dealing with the listening to the pain and anger out there. I get this, and I know many of you face this every day. So it seems to me that one of the remedies toward dealing with untreated trauma and negativism, pessimism, despair, is still being able to seek out that which you find inspiration. When I talk to young people, I say, where do you get your inspiration? Is it music? Is it a poem? Is it a movie? Is it a book? Is it a walk in the park? And whatever brings you joy and inspiration, we got to double and triple down on that. In many places in the workplace, you know what it is? It's the ability and the freedom to be able to create, the latitude to be able to explore and push your ideas on what you are passionate about, and realizing you can do that without repercussion. That's passion in the workplace. So under my leadership, you will be empowered to pursue that which you are passionate about, to draw energy from it. And if it's fighting racism, then we will fight racism. We're going to create a new department in the city. It's called the Seattle Jobs Center. And this center will be a means by which people, students, young adults, older adults, makes no difference, can retool themselves, find out what opportunities they still may want to explore. My mother and father became career city employees. I've been an employee here as well. But there are a lot of people who are in jobs and they want to figure out, well, what's my entry point? Is it Indeed or LinkedIn or an apprenticeship? We're going to double down on interns to make sure that young folks have an opportunity to work with you. So we're going to use both jobs in the private sector and in the public governmental sector to bring it into the city, and we are going to be an economic generator for city employees and non-city employees. We're going to create another a public first responder unit. We are going to recruit from our communities, our underserved communities, and when we examine where a gun and badge does not go, as they should not, these will be unarmed public safety officers. Perhaps there are people out here who want to protect their own communities and who are culturally competent. We're going to be passionate about building this department together. These folks understand that an officer should not have been in Charlene Lyles' apartment that day. Should be alive today if we had this kind of person. So we're going to recruit, train differently, and we're going to be passionate about this work. And so to regain our health, our mental health, and to restore our joy, we're going to be passionate about that which inspires us, which I believe is doing good work. That's what we'll do under the Harrell administration.
Thank you so much, Bruce. I kind of have a quick follow-up. I just think it follows on the topic, especially as you all speak about jobs and how folks are facing it. And it's this COVID-based reality question. So, you know, anecdotally speaking, a lot of us are hearing stories that basically Black and brown employees, the ones that weren't always out on the front line keeping working, actually prefer to telework because it does not have them introduced to environments that are racist and that cause trauma. So I want a minute each for each of you to take on, what's your take on that, on Black and brown folks actually seeing telework as a way and means for them to to maintain their well-being. And start with Lorena and then Bruce.
Yeah, I've been hearing the same thing, in large part because as the president of the city council, I'm the sort of chief administrator, the CEO of the legislative department, if you will, and we're hearing, we have really instituted a lot of systems in our legislative department to hear from our rank and file staff about, you know, what concerns them about coming back to the office. And so I think this is consistent throughout the city. People who have the ability to telework, and now that we've done the greatest, longest experiment, forced experiment in our life around telework, we know it works. People can have high productivity and be in environments that are more productive and healthier for them. And I think that the city needs to continue to allow for those individuals who would like to continue to telework to be able to have the ability to do that. Now the challenge comes in around making sure that we have consistent systems so that supervisors aren't applying that standard inequitably based on department and division throughout the city, and that's something that I would want to focus on.
Thank you so much, Lorena. Bruce?
So I think telework is cool. And I think that we should encourage it where it makes sense. It makes sense in so many jobs. And so I'm all for it. And again, like my opponent said, make sure people are doing their work. But studies are showing that people are working so much harder actually with telework. So it goes to my last point, that I actually believe also I like working around people and I like seeing them and having coffee with them and talking about other things other than work sometimes. And so I don't want to lose those experiences as well, because a lot of people get burned out from telework. So there's a balance I think that the employees may want. I also would suggest that some of the informal relationships that occur in person sometimes are sort of cool, because I want to make sure people are promoted and respected in the workplace and they have opportunities. It may be something like doing a holiday party or something, but I want to formalize relationships. So yes, I'm all in for telework, but we have to realize that particularly members of our community, that we benefit from informal relationships too. So I want to make sure that the tools are there for success for everybody, telework or not telework.
Great stuff. Thank you so much. Next question, and I think we're starting with Bruce on this one, all right?
Yes. Yep, that's right. So this next question. The City Budget Office recently collaborated with the Office for Civil Rights to encourage department finance managers to partner with Rsgi co-leads and work towards more racially equitable budgeting practices. Historically, departments that focus on individuals that commit crimes, such as policing, the courts, and the city attorney, have been given more funding and resources than programs that address the structural root causes of the crime, such as human services, neighborhood planning, and protection from discrimination. Please share your vision as mayor for a racially equitable budget. How will you create more opportunities for collaborative decision-making between the mayor's office and non-management city staff about city budgets? And how will you create more opportunities for collaborative decision-making between the City of Seattle and BIPOC communities about city funding?
Okay, Bruce first, and 4 minutes for this one because it's another big question. So.
Okay. No audible, no asterisk questions on this one, Kelly? So, the work that I did when I passed the bias-free policing law, or to see exactly the disparity in who's caught up in our judicial system becomes rich work that we must do. When I banned the box legislation, and I will be honest with you, I did not have a lot of support initially on banning the box. Private employers did not like it. Many minority companies didn't like it because they would say, hey, I want to know the background of everyone that I hire. But we know that because of the rich work that you all do, and what data would suggest is that the war on drugs and the high incarceration rate of our country, the highest in the world, treats people unfairly. So this is a great point that we must look at and do as much preventative work as we can, and I think I've been a leader in that regard. That's exactly why I want to create that Seattle Jobs Center, to make sure that people have all of the opportunities that are out there for them. So my vision will be, again, when we look at the whole continuum of a person's life, 0 to 4. We look at brain development, and full confession, I did not realize brain development between 0 and 4 was such an incredible part of an infant's life. So as the city continues to look at its the richness work, the rich work it's doing in pre-K work and daycare centers and best practices for brain development, that becomes critical work on addressing the racial divide. We go then to the Seattle Promise, is something that I first started in terms of putting money in a budget for kids coming out of high school that just don't have the ability to go to school, or they don't know what they're going to do coming out of high school. They just didn't graduate with a 4-point, they graduated with a 2.6, 2.7 GPA, and they're looking for some mentors and some services. So my vision to make sure that our budget reflects these historical injustices that we continue to perpetuate from 0 going all the way through the high school experience, and of course continuing to adulthood. I don't know how the current council are going to address some of the issues across the street in the courthouse, but I know there's some discussions on looking at, are they truly implementing the kind of restorative justice measures we want to see? And I know that the council are well versed in this body of work, so we'll see sort of how that fares out. And I guess the last piece I'll respond to is, how will I create more opportunities for collaborative decision-making between City of Seattle and BIPOC communities about city funding? Well, quite frankly, when I retired from city politics, this kind of stuff I started doing. I started engaging with, I became the general counsel for the Rainier Valley Community Development Fund, which is a lending institution for primarily communities of color. I became president of the board of the Central Area Development Association, which was a affordable housing developer for the African American community and underrepresented communities. And so working with them, first thing saying with the communities are, how do we build capacity to advocate with the city such that we can get funding at the appropriate time? So this is work that I'm passionate about. So now as mayor, certainly I will lead these discussions, doing the outreach, understanding that many of these organizations just do not have the wherewithal. They don't have the capacity. They don't have a full-time grant writer. So the outreach work that we must do together becomes incredibly important. So you'll see us leading the way, and be proud to work with many of you doing that work.
Thank you, Bruce. Lorena, your turn.
Great. So for many years, it has been true that our city budget hasn't fairly and equitably invested in human services, neighborhood planning, and protection from discrimination. And you know, that's part of what I was lifting up in an answer that, in a question that was asked previously around, you know, sort of how have you evolved in the area of racial justice after last year? And this is true for this question as well. You know, we, as elected leaders today, right now, in this moment, are being called upon to truly develop budgets that are going to be reflective of our values. And the question will remain, are we going to continue to increase and bloat policing budgets, court budgets, and city attorney budgets, or are we going to begin the hard work of making difficult decisions to move money into other budgets that will address those structural root causes of public safety, which are really about poverty and inequality and lack of housing and an education system and a healthcare system that does not serve the needs of BIPOC communities. And this is the hard and important work that the next mayor has to do. These are difficult decisions. And right now, we are in a situation where it's being made into a binary choice, right? If you want, you know, the choice is get more cops if you want public safety, or, you know, or have less cops and sacrifice public safety. And I just want to challenge us as a city family to acknowledge that we can do both. We can live our values by reducing the budget in areas of the city that have historically and currently perpetuate much harm in our communities, while also acknowledging that we have to invest in alternatives to these harmful systems that are going to produce more sustainable, long-lasting, deep transformational change and equity within our communities of color. And so I am very committed to having a racially equitable budget by making sure that we are doing things like staying true to our commitment to participatory budgeting. This was historic for us as a city last year, where we created, for the first time ever, a sizable amount of dollars that would be subject to direction of investment by BIPOC community members. It is now, in this current budget, baked into the budget as part of the baseline budget moving forward. We've come a long way from sort of, pennies available through the your choice, your vote kind of investment, which is a form of participatory budgeting, to $30 million baked into the budget that's now become $60 million, and now there's a demand to make it $120 million, right? This is really transformative work that really does center the needs of BIPOC community members by saying we're going to listen and be guided by the needs expressed by those who could benefit greatest by these investments, while also doing the hard work of, again, saying, how do we reform and transform these criminal legal systems that have really created and continue to create a lot of harm? And I'm committed to continuing to do that hard work and to do it together with all of you, and to make sure that we are being held accountable to the communities we serve.
Thank you, Lorena. We've got, we have two more questions that we're going to go with. We're going to do 4 minutes each for these questions because they're big questions. I just wanted to let everybody know that. Thank you both so much for hanging in there. We're almost done. Let's go ahead and go on with the next question.
So I will go back to Lorena. For this question, this is about hiring. In the past, some department directors have been selected because of their political relationship with the incoming administration. However, the mission-driven work in city department requires directors that have subject matter expertise, executive leadership experience, racial justice understanding, and accountable community relationships. For the first question, what process will your administration use to select department leaders? Number two, will you include city workers and community members in the vetting process for department directors? And number 3, do you believe department directors need additional employment protection to prioritize the need of the community in their work?
I love this question because it sort of gets right to the center of my process wonk. This is a really important question because department leaders really do drive the work and drive the agenda. And for city workers who've been at the city for much longer than any of us have been, you all have seen political figures come and go and come and go. And you all are here left holding the pieces of whatever's left in the wake of that transition. So I think it's really important for the next mayor to remain committed to a consistent process for each department leader and director that includes clear, articulable commitments around racial justice understanding. Again, not just in words, not just performative, but I want to see what have you done in community to actually achieve anti-racism in your prior body of work. And I think in terms of the process, right, how do we vet folks? And I'll give you a recent example of how I just recently did this. So in my own office historically, I don't make hiring and vetting decisions by myself. I include my legislative aides as part and parcel of the application review process, of the job description process, of the posting process, and of interviewing. And we all come together to say, how are we going to, what areas of inquiry are we going to prioritize? As council president, I had to hire a new permanent central staff director in our position. And I get to choose how to structure that process. And what I did is said, look, I want to hear recommendations from the people who are going to have to work with the central staff director. And that includes members of the executive branch. It includes, direct reports to the permanent central staff director. It includes council members and legislative aides. People from every division within the department were included in the interview process. And once I did the final interview, I did it with 4 other people, including other department heads within the legislative department at the very, very tail end. And I share that with you because even after I had all that vetting process, I still went back and talked to representatives of the line level staff to say, what are the things you really want to see in your leader moving forward? Because that's important, because we're trying to establish a culture of opportunity and a culture of our workers feeling that they are supported and that their best talents are going to be invested in and seen as an asset, not as a liability and not as a hindrance to whatever political motivations might be at play. And, think about the fact that a department director responds to one elected official. In the legislative department, our staff answered to 9 elected officials. That's a lot for a small staff. And so I think I'm well equipped to be able to stand up that kind of a process that is really inclusive, that includes city workers and community members in the process of not just vetting who the leader should be, but in helping to define who that leader should be. What skills should that leader have in this moment in time to take this department to the next level in doing the work that is critically important, whether it's garbage pickup or parks maintenance or all of the I kind of go through the list of all the work that OCR does or the Office of Labor Standards does, right? The people who work in our city departments need to believe that their leaders are going to be beholden to them and not to the political whims of who gave them the job. And I know I'm out of time, but I just want to say one last thing. I'm a big believer in requiring just cause termination as somebody who's a civil rights attorney, and so I would be interested in exploring a just cause protection for our department directors.
Thank you so much, Lorena. Bruce, your turn.
So, some people interview better than others. particularly when you're looking for out-of-state talent, now as an example, you have to sort of do a deeper dive into their neighborhoods and their community groups to figure out whether they can demonstrate the kind of leadership, at least that aligns with my vision. But make no mistake about this, if I am elected mayor, I will articulate a vision. That's what a leader does. Will I meet with RSGI teams? Will I bring in community members? Will I listen to their voice? Absolutely, at every opportunity. Many will be part of my transitional team, so we will establish a transitional team. The fact of the matter is that I have a lot of relationship capital in this city and in this country, and people have already contacted me, and quite frankly, I haven't put a lot of effort into that because we're just trying to stay on our message on creating a new vision for Seattle. I'll tell you, I take HR issues pretty seriously. So when I was on the council, I went and got certified. I became a senior certified professional under the SHRM certification process. That's a 4-hour exam, and I'm too seasoned to start taking exams, but I took the exam and passed it on my first attempt because I really needed to know, how do you onboard someone, how do you interview them, how do you do exit interviews, the whole HR process was sort of foreign to me. And so I look forward to a thorough process by which we get the best of the best. But your voice will be part of that discussion. I used Chief Scoggins as an example. That when we looked at fire chiefs, we had a certain number of people in the city that they had to have presided over as fire chief, a certain budgetary limits that they had to have authority over, and it excluded him from being considered. And when we looked at the finalists, there was not the level of diversity that I demanded. It was simple as that. So we lowered, woke you up, see you're nodding off. We said we must lower, I was gonna sleep at 2, so that's why I did that. I'm just joking. We lowered the criteria and said, look, maybe a smaller city, and maybe we could find that person and I used a Russell Wilson, started to use a quarterback that's injured at the time, that, he doesn't fit the prototype of a quarterback. He's too small, he's little, he doesn't fit, but he's a leader and a superstar. So I said, where's that kind of person? Often women are overlooked in some of these processes. The gender preference comes up often during interview processes, particularly when it's a male-dominated process. So we are going to open up the process, listen to community, make sure we are not biased in our evaluation, and we will find leaders. I need that around me. I need people around me that disagree with me. That's the diversity that I want to see in my administration. It's going to make us all better. So I'll tell you that that becomes the sort of again, one of the fun parts of this job, to be able to bring people who are empowered. And what I will say to the city employees, that I understand we are living in a culture where we're trying to do everything right and we're trying to educate ourselves, but I will give you some leeway that if you are working with passion and you are using database decisions and your heart is in the right place and you are believing in the righteousness of what you're doing, then you have permission to create and push forward policies. And if you make a mistake, that just becomes a different way of doing things, and we learn from that. So I need your voices at the table with me. Quite frankly, I want to see how people will operate under my leadership. You'd be surprised that someone says, well, that person just never really spoke up. I always pull people into conversations because if people are quiet, I'm saying, no, let's hear from this person, let's hear from that person. The richness of thought in people who are silent sometimes is overlooked. So I'm going to be tapping into everyone that wants to join my party. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Okay, we're on question 10. Julie, you're going to take away the last question. Thank you.
With more than 10,000 employees in over 30 departments, it's a massive challenge for the mayor to ensure that everybody in the City of Seattle government is communicating effectively. Poor communication can cause departments to operate in silos instead of working together to address the RSJ issues facing the city. A, what executive management structure do you envision putting in place so that departments openly communicate with each other on a regular basis about RSJ issues? B, how will you repair existing disconnections between departments and how they approach RSJI issues?
So Bruce, you're first, and then you have 4 minutes. Is that right? Bruce is first. That's what I thought. Okay, you looked at me real quick, so I was like, ah. Okay, so Bruce, you're first. 4 minutes, and
I will tell you, I'm not using all 4 minutes on this one.
exactly. You could let loose because you have 4 minutes, but it's like it could take less. So
I will take less on this because I had the question in advance. Thank you for that. And I still struggle with how I was going to respond to it. So, because I haven't thought about the executive management structure enough on making sure we effectively communicate with everyone on the Rsgi issues. So first of all, in terms of structure, but I will say that that I am keenly aware that this is done differently in many departments. Some will have perhaps a paid person doing it. Some have volunteers. Sometimes there's. So one thing I would like to see, based on the, I would like to see consistency. I should notice that in the presentations to the council. And so whether the department head believes that a person needs to be paid in full time doing this work, or several people, I have to have these discussions with employees and department heads to see what makes sense. I will tell you this, though, that I believe that the race and social justice issues in the next 4 years will sort of dominate the discussion, whether it's environmental justice, police reform, small business revitalization, that the next mayor will have to have a command of this body of work to move all of the issues from climate change to transportation coming out of COVID. And the structure does become increasingly important, because we have to demonstrate to the entire city that we get it, and we have to lead in that respect. And so, but in terms of what the structure looks like I said, I don't need the 4 minutes because I haven't worked that out. That's not coming from me. That's going to come from you. That's going to come from you with me. You may say, Bruce, we need a cabinet level position looking at this. Bruce, we need consistency throughout the departments. Bruce, we need budget for this. I'll work with you on that. There are disconnects. I know that. I need you to feel comfortable with me telling me why there are disconnects. Is it the department? Is it people below in mid-management? Where are the impediments? You have to trust in our staff and me to be able to have those conversations. And when I am wrong, and when I am using judgments that are impeding your progress to excel in the work that you're doing, I need to know that. I said earlier that I take the whistleblower protections and the retaliation laws very seriously. As an attorney of many decades practicing law, I know the law, I know the rules. So I have to create an environment by which you feel empowered to do this work. So the structure, I don't have a great answer on that, but I will tell you that the value behind working with you is what will govern the day, and then we'll make up that structure together.
thank you so much for that answer, Bruce. Lorena?
Yeah, you know, in the labor relations context, there is a structure that allows for management and labor partners to convene regularly to sort of just, you know, muse, if you will, about workplace issues or things that could work better. And so when I looked at this question, I thought about how that could be a good model to import into this space to allow for those, you know, management and Rsgi change team conversations to happen together and to be convened by the mayor as a way to signal that cultural, the need to change our culture of who's responsible for talking about Rsgi. And so I think, you know, I would be really interested in sort of exploring whether that's the right model to allow for the breaking down of some of those silos amongst departments. And, you know, oftentimes when I'm talking to department heads right now, I'll always say, like, hey, did you talk to so-and-so over at that department who was just talking to me about something that's kind of related? And I'm shocked at the number of times that I hear, no, I never thought about calling that person. And so, you know, I would need to learn from all of you a little bit more about sort of what is the most common sense way of creating intentional connectivity on some of these issues. Because I don't think that our fiscal note gets us there. I mean, how many of you have seen our fiscal notes at the city? How many of you have filled the fiscal notes out? Yeah. So there's a sort of catch-all Rsgi question, and I'm probably one of, I don't know, 20 people at the city who actually reads the fiscal notes. And I'm always, no insult to people who complete them. I know you're doing your hard work, but it's oftentimes, you can really see the disparities in how serious, RSJ is being taken by departments based on that response. And in some instances, you'll get, a page of information. In other instances, it's like, there's nothing to see here. We're good. And so I think sort of really thinking about what those systems we can put in place that really require consistent, deep analysis of RSJ potential impacts is really important. It's an important way to create that sort of intentional connectivity and just intentionality in ourselves in doing the work as we're continuing to propose it to decision makers. And so again, I mean, I think there's that opportunity to do those convenings, sort of similar to the labor management, labor relations a team that currently exists, and also just sort of looking to you all for guidance on sort of what are the best ways to create that intentionality. Because I know most of us don't want to participate on yet one more task force, but I think there's an opportunity for us to sort of, whether we implement new software or technology like message boards, or whether there's an interest in, for example, having the mayor's office convene all of the department folks, regularly to have these conversations is sort of what I'd be interested in continuing to explore with all of you around, making sure that we're really being intentional and thinking about these RSJ issues in our systems. Like, how do we bake it into our systems? That was part of the reason why I was so excited to support my own department's ask for a $45,000 commitment to hire a consultant who is going to help us identify how we bake in RSJI analysis into our legislative systems. And I think that work is needed likely at a citywide level as well.
Thank you so much, Lorena. And thank you, both candidates. You mentioned the fiscal notes, and part of the sort of the mystery of the fact that we are in government, but then all these things sort of happen in the real world, and the fiscal note is something that hardly anybody's clicking that deep to go and find it and see it, right? So, just sort of breaking down these barriers of understanding is such a big part of what we were trying to do today. And I really appreciate you both being here to answer those questions. I really want to thank Julie George, Ani Krishnan, and Dr. Christopher Ndifon for asking the questions, but more so for being the folks from the co-lead, the change team co-leads, that were here to represent them. And I want to thank you all for trusting us as the strategy team for holding this forum on your behalf and on behalf of the change teams that you all lead. We practice servant leadership, and so we only bring to the forefront that which comes from the grassroots folks that we're serving. And so I want to end today's program by simply thanking you all for trusting us to do that, and then thanking the rest of the support staff for being here, and thanking both candidates. One of you is going to be our boss come the new year, but there's a whole bunch of folks that are working for you that are doing anti-racist work that take their direction from those most harmed by systemic racism, and they take their direction from those on the cutting edge of activism and anti-racist work. And so it's sort of like we both have two bosses, and history is going to judge us. And so we really appreciate you both being here to understand that we want to start this relationship working together and getting off the ground running with work that's already happening. Last, I'll say to the viewers, to folks that are online, and to folks that watch online, hey, great Rsgi network. Remember to touch base with your change team co-leads on work around organizing for budgeting, on the work groups for organizing around language premium access, for the work groups organizing around digital page interface for city website pages, and then lastly for the groups interacting and organizing around the new governance charter for change teams across the city. Just stay tapped in. This work and a lot of other work is ongoing, and we invite you all to just jump into the bandwagon as the struggle continues. So I appreciate you all, and thank you so much for joining us for this forum.